Let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. I am told that there was a couple who started having a few rough edges around their marriage, and they decided to go to a marriage and family therapist. And part of the problem was the wife liked to communicate and the husband did not. And it was apparent to the therapist very quickly, the issue. And so he was trying to get the husband to begin to talk some. And he said to him, you know, an attentive husband would know the favorite flower of his wife. Do you know the favorite flower of your wife? And for a second he was a little stunned, but he got it and he nodded and he leaned over to his wife and he said, Martha White, self-rising flower, right? Now, what does that story have to do with this sermon? Absolutely nothing. But I thought we needed a chuckle before we got into the first part of this sermon, because the first part is very dreadful. And we're going to need some light about halfway through. Okay. So remember that chuckle as we proceed. Our society, our culture, has certainly changed over the last 50 years. It has accelerated over the last 25 years. The Christian church has also changed in that time. This is not the same church that I remember when I became a pastor 35 years ago. It has changed dramatically. When I came into the ministry, the Christian church was still at the heart of our society in this country. It still had a place. It still had credibility in our country. But today things have eroded, and the Christian church has lost its place in our society and has almost become irrelevant to 50 to 60% of the people in our country. That's the nature of our society today. Now, we thought we were protected. We even had laws out there trying to protect the Christian church and to ensure that it would be relevant. But you know, legislation never creates good Christians, does it? If it did, Washington would be filled with saints. And we know that it's not. Once there was an altruistic spirit in our country. We believed there was a right way and a wrong way, and we were willing to commit ourselves to that right way. We believed that we would sacrifice for that right way. We would believe as individuals we would give ourselves to the greater whole. We would commit our lives. That spirit seems to primarily rest now with service people, armed forces people, and to police service folk, and to fire, and to nurses, and to teachers who are teaching all over the place, who could have made a lot more money wherever they had gone, but chose to invest themselves into the lives of children. But for the most part, we have lost that sense of self-sacrifice. By the most part, the rest of us have been described by social scientists as having become self-centered and narcissistic. demanding to be at the head of the line, demanding to be served first, demanding the light and the attention. Going from that willingness, that sense of privacy and willingness to sacrifice, to today broadcasting every thought, every whim, every wish, every want, and where we are on social media to people that we think really want to know where we are and what we think. And what's so sad about that, we created that group of people. We don't want to know that you're at the drugstore or where you're walking at the moment. Fold that into what a friend of mine who teaches in a university told me a couple of years ago. It was a senior level psychology class. And he asked them if they knew, for certain, if they knew that they would not be caught, discovered, or it would be known by anyone other than themselves, would they be willing to lie, cheat, or steal, to gain $1 million? 95% said yes. Does that disturb you? Some social scientists who are describing this postmodern culture we have created point to all kinds of reasons on to how we arrived here. Part of it is the devolution of the Christian church in our society. But they point to some other things too. Some believe the greatest generation forgot what made them great. And some of you are a part of that great generation. And what really made the great generation great was their willingness to sacrifice. Willingness to give when they didn't have anything to give. The willingness to build for the future when they knew that it was not advantageous for them to build. So they built schools and hospitals and orphanages and other kinds of institutions, sacrificing to ensure those things were built for generations to come. Now what they forgot was it was that sacrifice that made them great, but when their next generation, their children and grandchildren came along, instead of letting them earn their way through life, they wanted it better for them than they had it, so they gave life to them. They gave them things. And so the generations that came later simply came with hands open, simply having it handed to them. Other scientists say that sports actually played into this issue. And it shocked me when I read that, because one of the first times I really got a sense, besides family, of course, of altruism, of self-sacrifice, was in sports, where we gave ourselves up to the whole. We gave ourselves to the team. We committed ourselves to the team. We lost our individuality for the team. But these scientists point to now how in the last 20 years that we don't, and it's because of that self-esteem issue that's out there. We want our kids to have great self-esteem. So in competition now, we don't have winners or losers. And we have participation medals. And so as these children graduate and go on into life, they don't know how to fail. And they don't know how to succeed. Some other scientists point to the movies. How these movie stars, their self-aggrandizement and their self-importance, and how they project these images, and then their morality and ethics are suspect, and our children watch that and listen to that. And they watch the movies where people lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead, and it doesn't cost them, and sometimes it's even celebrated in the process. So today on television, we've gone from Father Knows Best to Married with Children in Modern Family. We've gone from Shirley Temple to Honey Boo Boo. From my 3 sons to my 3 dysfunctional daughters called the Kardashians. From the real McCoys to Myrtle Manor. And after a few decades of greed is good mentality, we now have a society that believes that you are what you own. That somehow the more we own, the better we are as people. And we know that that's not true either, don't we? And if you we have no freedom to our society is having no boundaries, having no accountability, no rules. So lying and cheating and stealing is okay as long as you don't get caught. And if you get caught, blame it on your mother. Now that I have you sufficiently depressed, let me hasten to say that there's hope. There is hope. The rest of the sermon is going to deal with that hope. And guess what? You are that hope. You. Because you are the salt. You are the light. This text comes on the heel of the Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon on the Plain, whichever you want to choose. And Jesus is still using that indicative voice, not the imperative voice. Imperative voice, if he was using that, it would mean you have to do this to get in the kingdom of God. But when you look at it, he's using the indicative voice. And the indicative voice means that you're in the kingdom, and this is how kingdom dwellers act. This is what kingdom dwellers do. Kingdom dwellers are salt. Kingdom dwellers are light. Now, we're not impressed with that salt. I mean, you can go to the grocery store today and buy a box of Morton for what, 59 cents? But salt over time, it's one of those minerals that actually lost value. In first century Palestine, salt was actually worth more than gold. It was worth more than silver. Roman soldiers were actually paid with salt. That's where we get the word salary. Salt. And the Romans had an expression, there's nothing more valuable than light and salt. Salt was precious. Salt purified wounds. If you got hurt, you put salt in the wound. That's where the expression came from. You're pouring salt in the wound. It wasn't a bad thing. It's bad to us, we think, but back then, pouring salt in the wound was actually a good thing because it purified the wound. Salt gave flavor to pretty bland food. Salt purified things. They had no refrigeration, so the salt actually kept things for longer periods of time. Now, to make salt stretch, they would mix it with other things. And those other elements would draw in moisture and odor, and so it would lose its saltiness. And they would just throw it out on the street to be trodden over. You are the salt, Jesus says to these disciples. Now he mixes his metaphors just a bit, and he says, you are light. You're the light of the world. Maybe he had that Roman expression in mind, nothing more useful than sunlight and salt. Light in that first century didn't come easy either. There were no forests. There were no large sections of lumber or trees to cut down to put in your fireplace. They actually burned shrubs. And you can imagine that if you're burning shrubs, you have to do that over long periods of time. I mean, you just got to keep getting more and more shrubs because it didn't last long. And oil was very expensive as well. Olive oil was almost as expensive as salt. And in a Palestinian home, you'd have one lamp. It was lit at dinner time, and as soon as dinner was over, the lamp was put out, and you went to bed. You are the light, though, Jesus says. Not of the household, not of the community, but of the world. Light chases away darkness. It's in the darkness where evil lurks and trolls and gremlins hide under your bed. Darkness is the bad breath of Lucifer. But light pushes it away. Now there's a beautiful little song that we used to sing in VBS and in Sunday school. It brings back great memories of a simpler day, a simpler time. We stood there with our little candle in our hand, and we sang what? Yeah. Let's sing it. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Beautiful little song. But we have to be real careful with that song, because we'll add sentimentality to it. And it was really a powerful song. You see, light is transforming. Back during the civil rights movement, little light, my little light, I'm going to let it shine, used to lead people out of worship service into the streets where people who had just worshiped went into a dark world of racism and bigotry. Powerful. Transforming. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. There is a revolution in the world. And that revolution is in you, because you are the salt and you are the light. Jesus never meant for us to sit still and vegetate. Jesus didn't save us for ourselves. Jesus gave us a task. And our task was to transform the world, to make disciples for Him. And the only way we do that is being salt and being light. Yes, there's a revolution in our world. A world filled with its self-aggrandizement and its self-centeredness. This is not kindergarten stuff. It's not VBS stuff. This is kingdom of God matters. I think the seriousness of it can be found in another song. You remember the song, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning? Yes. Philip Bliss wrote that song, and he wrote it about a true occurrence. There was a steamer trying to get into the harbor of Cleveland, and this is before Cleveland Lake Erie burned at night, 100 years ago or so. And there was a terrible storm, and the ship was trying to enter the harbor. It was following the lighthouse, but the lower lights, because of the storm, had gone out. And the ship missed the harbor. And it landed on the rocks. And many people died. And so Philip Bliss wrote that beautiful song. Brightly beams our Father's mercy from His lighthouse evermore, but to us He gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. You are the lower lights. You are the light of God. You show the direction to the harbor. Now, you might think you don't have much to offer. You might think your candle's too short or your lamp's too dim. You never know. You remember Senator Birch Bayh, his wife Marvella had cancer, and she battled with that cancer for years. And she said in an interview, another thing I learned is that each and every person out there can make an overwhelming difference in the lives of others. And the reason she said that was because after several weeks of chemotherapy, she walked out to her car in the parking lot, and she said she was very weak. And you could tell which car was her because it had Senator and a number on the back, on the tag. And when she got to the car, she realized there was a piece of paper on the windshield under the windshield wiper. And when she pulled, and it was on a torn piece of paper out of a spiral notebook written in pencil. And when she read it, it said, "Miss Bai, I've seen your car here for several weeks. I know what you're going through. I want you to know there are several of us praying for you." And Miss Bai took that note home. And she folded it so it would stand upright. And she put it on her stand beside her bed. And she said in the many weeks that followed more chemotherapy, it was beside her bed. It was the last thing she read before she went to sleep. And it was the first thing she saw when she got up in the morning. Light. Salt. Light. Salt. We, the church, the body of Christ in the world. Light. Salt. Why do people come to church? I went to a worship service several years ago, and they were having some kind of game show during the worship service, and the band was there, and it was dressed like Kiss, and I wasn't quite so sure if I had walked into the right place or not, and I'm sure people got something out of that, but I have talked to a lot of people since then, and there comes a time when they realize that after the buttered popcorn is eaten and the spritzer water has been drunk, that they're still hungry and thirsty. And they're looking. They're still looking. They're looking for light. And they're looking for salt. Light being direction. Salt being purpose. Still looking. There was a great book, Rabbit Run. I read it a long time ago by John Updike. Anybody here read that book? Okay. Harry Angstrom was a character in the book, and Harry was one of those people, and you will never recognize this character, but he was one of those people that had never grown up. When you talked to him, it was always about the touchdown he scored in high school, the home run he hit, the hole-in-one on the golf course. It was that kind of person. He never got beyond that. No real relationships in his life, and basically a loner. Well, one night when this war was going on in his soul, dark night, he's having all of these conflicting thoughts. He goes for a run, and he's running through town, and he thought, I need to go to church. I need to go to church. And he ran to the church, and he got to the stained glass window, and he realized there was no light on inside. And folks, there's nothing darker than a church with stained glass and no light on inside. And he tries to peep in. No light. And he thinks, well, maybe they forgot to turn on the lights. Maybe the janitor forgot to turn the lights on. Maybe they didn't have the money to turn the lights on. He pecks on the window, and nobody comes. And he finally runs off into the darkness. People come to church to find light. We're a city set on a hill. We are the light of the world. Let our light shine so others might see. I'm going to finish with this. In contrast to the church in John Updike's book, there's a church, Nikolai Kirch, which means Church of St. Nicholas. And it was in East Germany. And it's 1989, and it was during the height of Soviet Union persecution. You remember the unions were in battles, and it was really a tense time. We didn't know who was going to be in control of the nuclear weapons, on and on. And I guess if there had been a battle or a skirmish that had broken out at this church with bullets and hand grenades and tanks and stuff, there'd be monuments there today. But there are no monuments because there were no bullets, there were no bombs. But the people of this church went to church to worship. And they went in and they had worship and they began to pray together. They united their hands together and they began to pray. And then after the prayer, someone found some candles and they started passing out candles and they lit those candles. And then they went out the door and they went out into the street. And people saw the light that they were carrying and they ran back in their homes and they grabbed candles and they lit them and they went into the streets and joined those people of that church. And they went through the town and the numbers kept swelling. Eventually, 70,000 people united in the square of that town because of a prayer service of one church. And one of the government officials, he said, we prepared for everything. We prepared for a riot. We prepared for sticks and stones. We didn't prepare for candles. They had not prepared for the light. Light overcomes darkness. Salt enhances the flavors of life. There's nothing more powerful in this world than salt and light. Our community needs you. Our workplace needs you. Our homes need you. They need salt. They need light. And every time you speak for the voiceless, act for the powerless, stand for the hopeless, speak a word of justice when there is injustice, ring the bell of justice like a giant bell clapper, speak a soft word of grace to a broken and fallen sinner, you are light. And every time you withhold a hand of greed, refrain a fist of hate, speak words of peace and reconciliation between people and groups, you are seasoning for this world. You are indeed salt of the earth. You are a precious commodity that cannot sit in a shaker beside the boiling pots of life. You have to be added. And you've been called to serve. Spend yourselves. Risk yourselves. Be more than yourself. We're called to transform the world. Not to have the world to transform us. That's what's happened the last 50 years. The world's transformed us. Let us transform the world as disciples of Jesus Christ. Yes, there is transformation in this world, and it's a revolution because it goes against everything the world thinks valuable. And it has a theme song. You know what it is? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let us pray. Oh God, you have called us to be salt and light in this world, a world that's become dark and tasteless. Give to us the courage and the passion to be for you what the world needs in the corner of your kingdom we find ourselves this day. For we ask it not for our sake, but for the sake of your kingdom and the sake of discipleship for Jesus Christ. Amen.